Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Beyer from GAI Insights, and welcome to our daily Gen AI news briefing, where we discuss and rate top news items. Our team of AI analysts rate each article as essential, important, or optional for executives and leaders at companies. Today's briefing is sponsored by GAI Insights and will be led by David.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Excuse me. Today we will talk about the data breach that happened at Anthropic. We'll talk about another academic institution that's doing some great things to support research there and with the students, and talk about maybe the evolution of search to a degree. So let's start with the Anthropic article. Luda, what are your thoughts here?
Yes, sure. I rated this article as optional. I think we have had and will continue to have human errors when people just accidentally send things they didn't intend to other people. This was not a very serious data leak. There was no sensitive bank or any other information except for name and the potential outstanding balance for Anthropic. So I believe it's optional. And the article went into the FTC probe like very early in. So I don't think this was enough news.
Yeah, I agree. The interesting fact I saw in this article, 95% of data leaks are from human error. And this was obviously one. And wouldn't want to be that contractor right now. I have a feeling that they may be looking for other work.
Yeah. But it is unfortunate, but human errors happen all the time.
Yes. Any other thoughts?
Nope, optional.
All right, optional. We will move on. Ankaj, what's next?
Okay, the next one is a sort of new AI coding tool that has surpassed Google DeepMind's Alpha Code. So this tool called Alpha Codium is inspired by Alpha Code, but it is doing better than DeepMind's Alpha Code and a few other LLMs out there as well.
All right, Tim, what did you think about this new tool?
Okay, is my sound okay?
It is. We can hear you.
Okay, so this is an interesting article. I was sort of on the borderline between optional and important. The results they got are pretty interesting. It's a new kind of, not really that new a model, but a new model applied to code generation to attempt to make it more correct or less error prone, maybe is the way to say it, and also to include alignment content such as values and ethical statements. So not just generate me code that does X. And it uses basically multiple AI models working in tandem in one way or another. I am still skeptical of these things at one level because the reality is none of these has a reasoning engine. And so while they're better and better, and I'm skeptical, but I've been surprised at how good they are. That's the issue. But this is, it's hard for me to believe a lizard can write Shakespeare because there's just no reasoning in any of these engines. So you just add more lizards, you just get more lizard brains. You don't get a human brain. But maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And the results they got were pretty impressive.
Well, the idea in this one, as I didn't check me on my understanding here, was that it's using not only large language models, but previous or a different version of generative models, which is the generative adversarial network. And so therefore that network is kind of testing it and refining it. So even though it doesn't understand it, it is testing to see whether it works.
Right, but it's testing in a strange sense that is not human. It's still using transformers and word prediction and all the other stuff underneath. So general adversarial networks is a layer on top of that. So it doesn't.
Yeah, I think that this is important, especially for the software industry. And there's also an interesting new paradigm that was offered by these folks, and this is a flow versus just prompts engineering on top of the regular LLM. So it is certainly moving the needle to a much higher quality and less error-prone or bug-prone software generator. So I really think the software industry executives should know this. If they, I mean, they probably follow anyway, but I think it is important for the software industry. Like we rate certain articles important for pharma, this is important for software.
All right, we have an on the fence. Anybody else?
I'd go for optional. I think there are some other, GAN network, GAN created code creators. I agree with Tim, that, you've got, it's a different kind of reasoning. And I think when we talk about flow, to me, that I'm old enough, it sounded to me like it's an interpreted language. I mean, it's basically back and forth in a dialogue. So I agree it's important for software, but I think it's just another instance, and it's just a vendor announcement.
Adam, I'm curious. What do you think? About Speak?
I think for our target audience, this is optional. I think probably what I find most interesting and significant is that how quickly open source has surpassed something that was built enterprise grade. Right. We're going to see so much more of that. I talk quite a bit about that walled garden and how with this kind of technology, it's so difficult to keep control of your IP when you come up with something. And I mean, you think about the resources that it takes to outcompete someone like Alpha Code. It's phenomenal, and that the open source community is doing this so quickly in a matter of months. That's what I think is significant about this. But for our target audience, this is really optional news.
Okay, we'll go optional but interesting. What do we have next, Sankaj?
Okay. The next is a launch of a new GenAI computing cluster from University of Texas at Austin.
All right. Looks like they have 600 of the NVIDIA H100s in a cluster. That's pretty good for an academic institution. What do you think, Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are the leaders, right, as far as computing power in this AI field. We've had a chance to review some other universities, in prior weeks. We talked about University of Arizona, engage with AI and making it available. We talked about Harvard having an AI robot type of thing, doing a teaching assistant. But I don't think we've come across a university that's making this huge of investment in computing power. So I think that's significant. So I gave this article an important because of that. And then the other side is so many of the universities have obviously AI centers and AI programs and all of that. But what I thought was unique about this one is that they're really making a huge effort in becoming interdisciplinary. And just right before we started this call, we were talking about that, right? It's no longer just, AI is no longer just the realm of computer science, right? It's many things, right? And so I love in this article that they're talking about, partnering with healthcare organizations, with different departments within the university, so it's not just computer science. And I think that's what makes this unique. And that's where, we're going to see a lot of more focus. And as leaders, as executives, that's our target audience. I think it's very important to realize that this area of AI is truly interdisciplinary.
Yeah, for me, and for slightly different reasons, I thought it was also important. I think they're just another AI center in terms of compute power, which is cool, but they're kind of chinning the bar. What I found the most interesting was actually the depth of the vertical, which was National Science Foundation, AI Institute for Foundations of Medicine, the IFML, is also down there. So to me, it's the combination of those two things, and they're focusing on drug discovery, among other things, software code generation. But because if you look at National Science Foundation, they have been so instrumental in human genome decomposition and analysis and so forth, and it's just that's where the action is. So the fact they have one of those centers down there combined with a supercomputing center, that's what's important to me.
And that's a really good point, John. And if you think about it, I mean, they're all the way in Texas. Usually all of the pharma biotech, right? It's that biotech belt out in the East Coast, right? Massachusetts, Connecticut, all the way down to Pennsylvania area. So yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. So it sounds like important. Do we have any objections to that?
I'll just challenge, unless our audience is in an industry where they think they might be able to partner with them, like how is it of material to benefit to them? Why is this important news?
I think it's because I think any organization serious about AI and generative AI right now has to look long and hard at the university partnerships. So Bloomberg should be looking at it, Hollywood should be looking at, who they, just like, it's going to be, it's the space race all over again, but for everybody.
Yeah, I'm also in optional. I'm with Adam. For our audience, it is optional. It's good that the University of Texas put in this cluster, but look at other universities like MIT, Stanford, they already have access to computing power. So it's news, but I think for our audience, it's optional.
Paul, do you want to break the tie?
I'll keep it as optional, but I do want to note the Vector Institute in Canada is a very successful public partnership with a $30 million annual budget. And what they do is find an AI expert and a ton of GPUs, and that's what attracts the AI talent. And Facebook's done the same thing with their $10 billion here. So I think, at least from a recruiting standpoint, large companies who do want to attract AI talent need to understand this is one of the many things that the AI engineers are looking at, but I'll lean optional.
You sound like your argument made it important. Well, I'm gonna take the gavel and say it's important.
All right.
Okay, what's the next one?
Okay, the next one is from.
Yes, I was going to strike this one.
All right, this thing makes me nauseous. Okay, and the reason it makes me nauseous is this is a you've heard of listicles. This is a BSticle. This is a series of articles that have a particular format that is true of every technology. It's not about the technology. It's about the business. It's not just about the code. It's about the people. It's not going as fast as people expect, but in some areas it's pretty good. This is a bullshit article, and nobody should waste any time on it.
Okay, then we won't either. I was actually going to strike this article out of our discussion, and now you've backed me on that. So we will quickly move on. What's next, Akash? Optional for that one, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one is a new sort of browser functionality from Arc, which is called Arc Search. So it combines the browser search engine and AI into something new. And instead of providing just results like a Google search, it provides you proper context of the search and then also further links to sort of deep dive into that particular result.
All right, Paul, what are your thoughts?
Before I give my rating, I want to at least do a shout out to some of the folks online. I see Umesh, Michael, Harvey. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm sorry?
Mauricio as well. Yes.
Oh, yep. Thank you. Yep. So I rated this as important. I think this is way back in the early days of the internet first came out, people couldn't grok that you could actually have a universal thin client and see data somewhere else securely. And then people started putting up static pages, and that was like, whoa. And then people couldn't understand, oh my gosh, these things are going to be database driven here. So this kind of mental leap from one capability to another happened a lot in the early days of the internet. And I see the same thing happening here. I mean, Perplexity is going through and doing a layer of research. Usually you do Google and you henpeck, and then you do the first part of aggregation. And this is pushing the aggregation into the application of the robots. So, how this starts changing product search and employees, candidates who are evaluating, hiring, joining a particular firm is important. So I rated it as important.
I agree, but mostly for the reason you said. I think that whether this particular art tool is going to be significant or not is always unclear at this early stage of a market. However, this idea of integration and the disappearing of the AI into the function makes a lot of sense. It's amazing to me after 50 years that Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Excel are still heavily siloed, even though everything on a computer is ones and zeros. So the ability to do everything in one place, and this is what we see with multimodal AI, the convergence of these various bits into one thing is important, really makes a difference.
I actually rate it as essential because I think it's first of all, I just started using it this morning, and it rocks totally. Maybe my default browser. But I think it makes it really easy for executives to see, hey, this is what we mean about an intelligence layer on top of whatever you have there in terms of search. Search is a function. Customers or people are trying to get something done, of which search is a piece. You know what I mean? So this is getting to the higher order thing. How am I getting stuff done? The phrase I hate, but it's very popular, so therefore I like it because people relate to it. Jobs to be done. Okay, the jobs to be done stuff, right? That Clay Christensen came up with. This helps you get the job to be done all the way with the whole job. So I think it's essential for our executives to look at this thing and say, "Oh, I get it. I could take all this information. My customers are trying to do something. We can help them get it done."
I gave it an important because I think, I agree with what you guys are saying. I also think it's showing that there's a disruptor. But to Adam's point earlier, I'm amazed how, while today this may be important, I don't think it's going to take more than a couple of months for someone else to come up with an idea like this, right? I do think it's an important thing to download, play with, experience it. So I gave it an eye.
Yeah, I will agree on important, and also just for marketers, I know that's not our audience, but the evolution of search is something to continually be watching, right? Because it is going to change. Whether it's going to change and still be Google's version of it that we all gravitate towards or not, like to be determined, but search is changing, and that's going to affect the way that your content is discovered online, and it's something that all marketers are kind of thinking about in the back of their head. So it sounds like we're going important on this one. All right, so we'll go to the last article. Sometimes we like to pull up some research, even though it might not be immediately relevant. And this is an interesting one about making models more efficient with a new technique. And Adam, what do you think about this?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So I actually had the opportunity just before this call on a social audio space on X to talk to a guy who's met some of these researchers over in Europe, and also someone who's on the comments today, Umesh, who has done a lot of work with his teams on using this and a similar capability, which is known as Parse GPT. So it's super interesting. The idea here is Slice GPT. They call it a post-training sparsification scheme. So what that means is after the model is trained, they can slice off parts of it. It's sort of like pruning it. But as it says in this article, they can remove 25% of the parameters, including the embeddings, after the model has been built for something like Llama 70B. So they can get rid of 25% of the parameters and maintain 99% of the performance with a zero-shot task. So it's significant in terms of the overhead that's needed on the GPUs for the inference. So overall, this is going to be a significant reduction in cost for compute. The example they give there is a 24 gig consumer GPU. The compute inference was reduced to 64% of the original amount. So you can almost double your performance in terms of the compute cost. And that is significant. In terms of our audience, though, not many people yet are really going to be at the point where they're applying these technologies at scale and really need to realize that benefit. They're still at the point where they're just trying to see the order of magnitude benefit of applying large language models. Whether you get a 15x or a 30x in terms of the performance, they're not at a point yet where this is really relevant to them. So as fascinating this is, and we're going to see a lot more about pruning these models. Umesh, who's on the call, he said they got a 70B model down under 1 billion parameters and still had it doing the tasks it was needed to. And so that's a significant reduction. I may not be right that it was 70B they used, but they've been slicing and dicing, and this research is really fascinating. But for our audience, this would still be optional.
Okay. How is this? I mean, pruning, we've been hearing about that happening for a while. Did you, from what you know, is this achieving like even better results? Is it just a different way of doing it? Like, how does
yeah, there are other people who could speak to this probably better than I could. What I understand is the challenges they describe there are that these other techniques need additional data structures, and they offer constrained speed up with current hardware. Exactly what that means, I'll leave it to someone else to interpret. It sounds like what this is really doing is it's finding ways to address some of the current bottlenecks and limitations with the technology out there.
Yeah, this is just one more. Again, remember, all of this is math-based. So you have to remember, where are we now? 24. 7 years ago, there was no transformer. So it's only been 7 years since the fundamental math that's making all these models work is actually developed. Now, it's based on a lot of math that's well understood. And if you want to grandly oversimplify it, it's all about matrix multiplication. And but it's not entirely true, but it's close enough for army work, as they say. And so the number of parameters is a huge influence on it. And one thing to note, by the way, it doesn't affect the training, which is an enormous cost. So it just affects inference, which, as Adam points out, is important, but not that relevant, not nearly as relevant right at the moment as training costs. But we've been saying this for a while. There are going to be new ways of dealing with these large matrices. What they're trying to do is cut down the size of these matrix multiplications, basically, and other kinds of manipulations, but just cut down on the number of parameters and see if you can maintain the quality of the performance. And they did a pretty fine job here, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of LLMs as essentially a new kind of operating system for partial operating system. I mean, you go back in history of operating systems. There's so many optimizations in each little part of an operating system. And we're just at the beginning of this.
Yeah, and I was going to say, well, training's a one-time cost, inference is an ongoing cost, and some of the earlier studies say within a few weeks, the amount of, for example, use on ChatGPT is equivalent to the use of what was used during the training. So it will be an expensive cost for people going forward. So any way to make it efficient is probably a good thing.
Yes, and can I just pile on as to why I think that HBR article is baloney? They talk about everything being built on standard platforms. This is a great example of, let's say that you're Novartis and you're working with UT Austin, you're creating a molecule exploration LLM in conjunction with a traditional computational math version of that, right? You're not building on, you would start using things like this, which would make a material difference, 64% of the compute necessary versus 100%. The compute's a big part of the economics of doing that molecular exploration. As Novartis, you should have ML ops, machine learning ops, and other scientists who can drive the cost of this down, because your ability to explore that space is materially impacted by the different customization you're going to do with the semantics. And so that's why that's another reason that thing really annoyed me. It acted like these platforms are stable. They're not. We're at the very beginning.
Yeah. I think you should write
David, I agree with optional, but I think it is an important trend for us to watch in general, the slimming down of this model for operational cost efficiency.
I would add that it's essential for all of us to understand what gets under John's skin, because when it gets under his skin.
That's right. Watch out.
Well, my wife has said to me, a lot of people mistake you for a nice guy. It's just you don't give a hoot about many things, but when they hit something that bothers you, you're a first-class jerk. So there you go.
David, I wonder if we could just take we've used two terms this one for just explain what inference is and alignment is. Those are two terms we use multiple times. I don't know, Tim, you mind just giving a non-technical overview for that, just for our audience?
Sure. So large language models you can think of have two broad phases. They are trained, which involves setting up all these parameters that determine how things work. So you can think of it as just a big crank when you're running it, and you put a prompt in and turn the crank and something comes out. And so in that sense, it's very mechanistic, and the parameters are the primary thing that drives that, and those are derived through training. So training is a big expense. That's where these large language models come from. inference is that crank. When you put the prompt in, turn the crank, get something out, that crank is the inference that generates the result. And so that's also important, but generally much smaller in each turn of the crank. As David points out, if you're doing 1 million things a day on that, that's 1 million inferences a day. It can add up pretty quick, but it's a tiny fraction of the cost for each turn of that crank compared to the training, which is a one-time cost. Well, let's not say one time, as John said, these things are retraining and moving pretty fast, but an occasional cost as opposed to a constant cost.
And maybe add a couple of sentences, Tim, on the why the training is more laborious and takes time. Because what's happening behind the scenes, there is a very complex mathematical function that needs to be solved to essentially say that the model has resolved itself with an answer. And then when it does, then those parameters are captured as the right parameters and the model is deemed to be trained. So in order to get that function solved, you go looping through to solve that function until it is resolved. So it takes time to do that. And that's
right. And it's linear, approximately linear in time. So it approximately scales in the amount of effort and time on the computers to the number of parameters. So when you hear trillions of tokens, hundreds of billions of parameters in training these models, it's a lot of computing power to get through those cycles.
Yeah. And then Tim, thank you. Could you also define alignment then?
The what?
Alignment.
Oh, alignment.
Yeah.
So alignment is one of those vague terms we use when, it's like Marvin Minsky had one of the greatest jokes I've ever heard. He says, any real science never includes science in its name. Math is a real science. Physics is a real science. Political science, computer science, social science, forget about it. They're pseudosciences. And alignment is one of those pseudosciences right now. But the idea is that there's more than just the computing and the turning of the crank. There's this idea that we don't want these language models because they can issue semantic clauses with meaning. We don't want that meaning to vary from certain alignments. Literally, we want to keep them in this little road here. We don't want them to veer off the road. So racist comments or completely inaccurate comments or things like that. We want to keep those out. And so that general process of trying to keep the LLM on the road is called alignment.
Yeah, the thing I like, the most general argument that I like a lot in that is from Herb Simon and Alan Newell from back in the 60s, where they said, okay, you have an objective function that is, what you're trying to accomplish. So that, like not racist comments, yes, good insight kind of thing. That's the objective function. And then you have an evaluation function that tells you how well you're doing against that.
Right, so, but I would argue it's not even objective, the output function, because it's pretty hard for most people to define what a good comment is or what a good outcome is in a lot of cases.
I would say most people don't have, like, let's say credit analysis. You have a clear objective function, right? I want to get paid back, and and here's the FICO score is the way I do it, and then I can say FICO higher is better, right? I agree with you. A lot of this stuff is only semi-structured, not really structured, so it doesn't have a good objective function.
Right, and yes, Michael Novak, data science fits in that same thing of trying to be, just a nice word put on top of a vague set of things that people do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of a bigger thing, which is all of these things have an implicit utility function and morality built into them. Right. Because most computer scientists, forgot whatever philosophy they know. They have this, vague notion of goodness, which is baloney. But anyway, that's not the whole problem.
All right, don't be evil. Don't be evil.
Paul, can tell us about the Learning Lab tonight?
Yeah, so Learning Lab tonight is 7 o'clock Eastern, and one of our own guests in this call will be on the showcase. So Adam, your morning tomorrow, you want to share what your showcase will be?
Oh, I wrote it down and sent it to you so I wouldn't have to remember, Paul.
Oh,
no, I'm kidding. So I'm going to be sharing a workflow I'm working on right now to use DALL-E to generate some concept art, and then a free online tool to upscale it, and then Runway ML, which can do image to video, and just showcase a little bit about how you can use all of these tools to start making videos. Runway ML is actually having a 48-hour competition this weekend. So I'll be sharing the details about how you can sign up for that. You can get 300,000 free credits, which is 1,000 hours, just to have a play with the tool over the weekend. So it's a great opportunity to just dive right in and explore another of these amazing new technologies.
And Paul, Harvey or David, Harvey Castro mentioned we should talk about, not to make a pun, @mention, which was just added to OpenAI. And I don't know how important it is. He thought it was very important, and there's lots of hype about it in the press already.
All right,
Let's talk about it tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll put it on the agenda for tomorrow since we're at the half hour here.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We will see you again, same place, same time tomorrow. Have a good day.